There comes a moment in life when silence speaks louder than words ever could. A moment when someone who disappeared, who withdrew, who built wells so high you thought you'd never see them again, suddenly stands right in front of you. And in that moment, something profound happens every single time. Because understand this. People who avoid don't avoid because they don't feel. They avoid because they feel too much and they don't know how to hold it. So when they finally face you after a long silence, it's not random, it's not casual, it's not accidental. It is the result of an internal storm that has been building quietly, powerfully, relentlessly. You see, while you were moving through your pain, trying to understand, trying to heal, they were fighting a different battle. A battle between their desire for connection and their fear of losing control. And here's the truth most people miss. Distance doesn't erase emotional imprint. Time doesn't dissolve real connection. It intensifies it, especially for someone who suppresses instead of processes. So when they come back, when they finally stand before you again, what you're witnessing is not confidence, it's courage mixed with fear. They will look at you, and in that moment, their nervous system is doing two things at once. One part is saying, "This is where I feel something real." And the other part is screaming, "Protect yourself, don't get too close." That tension, that contradiction, that's the signature of an avoidant heart opening, even if just for a second. And here's where your power comes in. Most people in that moment react. They let old emotions take over. They chase answers, demand clarity, or try to pull the person closer. But that approach, it feeds the very pattern that caused the distance in the first place. Because you cannot create safety by applying pressure. You cannot build connection by forcing vulnerability. And you cannot transform a dynamic by repeating the same emotional habits. Instead, what changes everything is presence. Calm, grounded, unshaken presence. When you stand there, not needing validation, not seeking approval, not trying to control the outcome, something shifts. Because now, for the first time, they are not meeting the version of you that reacts, they are meeting the version of you that leads. And leadership in emotional connection is not dominance, that's certainty. Certainty in who you are. Certainty in what you deserve. Certainty in what you will and will not tolerate. When an avoidant senses that certainty, it disrupts their pattern. Because they are used to distance creating pursuit. They are used to silence creating anxiety. But when silence is met with strength, when distance is met with dignity, when their return is met with calm awareness instead of emotional chaos, they feel something different. They feel safe and challenged at the same time. Safe because you're not attacking or demanding. Challenged because they can no longer hide behind their old patterns. And this is the moment where transformation becomes possible. Not because you changed them, but because you changed the dynamic. Every single time an avoidant comes back, life is giving you a test not of love but of self-mastery. Will you abandon yourself to reconnect with them? Or will you stay rooted in your truth and allow connection to rise to meet you there? Because real connection, lasting connection, is not built on emotional highs and lows. It is built on emotional stability. And the moment you embody that, everything changes. They may not say it. They may not fully understand it, but they feel it. And that feeling, that grounded, unwavering presence is what they were running from all along. Not you, but the depth of what they felt with you. So when they stand before you again after a long silence, remember this. You are not there to convince them. You are not there to fix them. You are not there to chase what disappeared. You are there to show, through your presence, what it means to be emotionally free. And when you do that, whether they stay or go, you win. Silence, especially from someone with avoidant tendencies, is often misunderstood as indifference or emotional detachment. But in reality, it is rarely that simple. What looks like distance on the outside is usually a storm of unprocessed emotions on the inside. These individuals don't disconnect because they feel nothing, they disconnect because they feel too much and don't have the internal tools to manage it. Their silence becomes a form of self-protection, a way to regulate emotional overwhelm when closeness starts to feel like a threat rather than comfort. When connection deepens, it activates something powerful within them. It stirs vulnerability, dependency, and the possibility of loss. For someone who equates vulnerability with danger, this can feel incredibly destabilizing. Instead of leaning in, their instinct is to pull back. Not because the connection lacks meaning, but because it holds too much meaning. The deeper the emotional bond, the stronger the urge to create distance. Silence, then, is not a reflection of how little they care. It is often a reflection of how much they are struggling internally. Inside that silence, there is often overthinking, second-guessing, and emotional conflict. They replay conversations, question their own feelings, and wrestle with the tension between wanting closeness and fearing it. But instead of expressing this confusion outwardly, they internalize it. They may convince themselves that stepping away is the logical choice, that creating space will bring clarity. In truth, it only delays the emotional processing they are trying to avoid. Their silence becomes a pause button on feelings they don't yet know how to face. There is also a deep fear of losing control. Emotional intimacy requires surrender, the willingness to be seen, to be affected, to risk being hurt. For avoidant individuals, this surrender can feel like a loss of independence or identity. So when emotions rise, silence becomes a way to regain control. By withdrawing, they reduce the intensity of what they feel. It's not that the feelings disappear, they simply become hidden, buried beneath layers of distraction and emotional suppression. At the same time, this silence often creates a painful paradox. While they are trying to protect themselves, they are also reinforcing the very loneliness they fear. They may think distance will bring relief, but over time it can amplify their sense of isolation. The connection they stepped away from doesn't fully leave them. It lingers in their thoughts, in quiet moments, in the subtle awareness that something meaningful was left unresolved. This is why silence is rarely clean or complete. It carries emotional residue that continues to build beneath the surface. For the person on the receiving end, this silence can feel confusing and even hurtful. It's easy to interpret it as rejection or lack of care. But understanding the deeper dynamic changes the perspective. The silence is not necessarily about you, it is about their relationship with their own emotions. It reflects a coping mechanism, not a final verdict on the connection. Recognizing this doesn't excuse the behavior, but it does bring clarity to what is actually happening beneath the surface. What makes this dynamic even more complex is that avoidant individuals are often not fully aware of their own emotional processes. They may not consciously think, "I'm overwhelmed, so I need to withdraw." Instead, it shows up as a vague discomfort, a subtle urge to create space, or a sudden shift in behavior that even they struggle to explain. Their silence is less of a calculated decision and more of an automatic response shaped by past experiences and learned patterns. So when silence appears, it's important to see it for what it truly is. Not emptiness, but overflow. Not absence of feeling, but an inability to hold what is being felt. It is the language of someone who has not yet learned how to stay present with their emotions, especially when those emotions involve deep connection. Avoidant individuals don't return simply because time has passed or because circumstances randomly aligned. Their return is almost always triggered by a shift inside them, specifically when the fear of losing you begins to outweigh their fear of intimacy. For a long time, their primary instinct is to protect themselves from emotional exposure. Closeness feels risky, unpredictable, and potentially overwhelming. So they create distance, convincing themselves that space equals safety. But what they don't anticipate is how that distance slowly transforms into something else entirely. At first, the separation may feel like relief to them. The emotional intensity fades, the pressure to engage disappears, and they regain a sense of control. But as days turn into weeks and sometimes even longer, another feeling begins to surface. It's subtle at first, just a thought here and there, a memory that lingers a little longer than expected. Then it grows. They start to recognize the absence not just as space but as loss. The connection they stepped away from doesn't fully leave them. It remains alive in their mind, replaying moments, conversations, and emotions they didn't fully process when they were present. This is where the internal conflict begins to intensify. On one side, there is still that familiar fear of getting too close, of being vulnerable, of losing control. But on the other side, there is now a new fear emerging, the fear that they may have lost something meaningful, something rare, something they might not easily find again. And this second fear is powerful because it challenges the narrative they used to justify their distance in the first place. They begin to question themselves. What if I made a mistake? What if that connection was different? What if I can't replace what I walked away from? These questions don't come from a place of clarity. They come from emotional pressure building beneath the surface. The longer they sit with this unresolved tension, the harder it becomes to ignore. What once felt like a safe escape now starts to feel like a risk of permanent loss. And here's the critical turning point. When the pain of missing you becomes more uncomfortable than the fear of facing you again, that's when movement happens. That's when silence starts to break. Not because they've suddenly resolved all their fears and not because they've mastered emotional vulnerability, but because the balance has shifted. The scale inside them tips. Avoidance is no longer the easier option, it becomes the heavier one. But their return doesn't come with full confidence or emotional clarity. It comes with hesitation, uncertainty, and often a quiet internal struggle. They may reach out in indirect ways, testing the waters rather than diving in. A message that seems casual, a small attempt at reconnection, or even just showing up in your presence. Again, these are not random acts. They are calculated risks from someone who is still trying to manage their fear while responding to a deeper emotional pull. What's important to understand is that their return is not always about readiness, it's about threshold. They've reached the point where not acting feels worse than acting. That doesn't mean they've fully transformed or that the underlying patterns have disappeared. It means they've crossed an internal line where connection, even with all its risks, feels necessary to explore again. This is why their behavior upon returning can seem inconsistent. One moment they appear open, the next they seem guarded again. That's because both forces are still active within them. The fear of intimacy hasn't vanished, it's simply been matched or temporarily surpassed by the fear of losing you. They are navigating between these two emotional extremes, trying to find a way to reconnect without feeling overwhelmed. Their return, then, is not a simple gesture. It is the result of an emotional tipping point. A moment where the idea of what if I lose this forever becomes louder than what if I get hurt. And in that moment, they choose to step forward not because it's easy, but because staying away has become harder. When an avoidant reappears after a long silence, it can be tempting to interpret it as coincidence, curiosity, or even convenience. But that interpretation misses what is actually happening beneath the surface. Their return is rarely random. It is driven by an emotional thread that was never fully cut, a connection that remained unresolved, continuing to exist in the background of their internal world even while they were physically absent. Avoidant individuals are skilled at creating distance, but distance is not the same as detachment. They may step away, distract themselves, and even appear completely unaffected on the outside, yet internally, the bond often lingers in subtle but persistent ways. This is because emotional attachment, once formed at a meaningful level, doesn't simply disappear through avoidance. It becomes dormant, not dead. And over time, that dormant attachment begins to resurface, especially when it has not been processed or brought to closure. Unresolved emotional attachment has a unique quality: it seeks completion. It pulls attention back to what was left open, what was never fully expressed, what was interrupted before it could reach clarity. For someone who avoids emotional depth, this creates a quiet tension. They may try to ignore it, rationalize it, or suppress it, but the attachment continues to exist beneath those efforts. It shows up in moments of stillness, in unexpected memories, in comparisons with new experiences that don't quite measure up. It becomes a kind of psychological echo that refuses to fade. This is why their reappearance often feels strangely timed. It might happen when you've started moving forward, when you've begun to regain your sense of balance, or when the connection is no longer at the forefront of your mind. From your perspective, it can seem sudden or even disruptive, but from their perspective, it is the result of a buildup that has been quietly forming over time. They are not reacting to the present moment as much as they are responding to the unresolved past that has resurfaced within them. There is also a powerful role that memory plays in this process. When avoidants distance themselves, they often filter out the intensity of the emotions that overwhelmed them. What remains over time are the more positive or meaningful aspects of the connection. The mind softens the edges of past discomfort and amplifies what felt good, what felt safe, what felt different. This selective recall strengthens the emotional pull, making the connection feel valuable again, sometimes even more so than when they were in it. At the same time, their internal narrative begins to shift. What they once framed as a need for space or independence can start to feel like a missed opportunity. They may begin to question whether their avoidance cost them something important. This questioning doesn't always lead to clear answers, but it increases emotional pressure. The unresolved attachment, combined with evolving perception, creates a momentum that pushes them toward re-engagement. However, it's important to understand that this return is not always conscious or fully understood by them. They may not clearly articulate, even to themselves, that they are being driven by unresolved feelings. Instead, it might show up as a vague urge to reconnect, a sense that something is unfinished, or a curiosity that feels stronger than usual. They follow that feeling without fully dissecting it, which is why their approach can sometimes seem indirect or uncertain. Their reappearance, then, is not about chance, it is about emotional continuity. It is the natural outcome of a connection that was paused, not completed. The attachment remained active beneath the surface, and over time it generated enough internal tension to bring them back into contact. They are responding to something that never truly left them, even if they tried to convince themselves otherwise. Understanding this changes the way their return is perceived. It shifts the focus away from external circumstances and toward the deeper emotional mechanisms at play. What you are witnessing is not randomness, but the reactivation of a bond that remained unresolved, quietly shaping their thoughts and feelings until it could no longer be ignored. When they finally stand in front of you again, what you see on the surface is only a fraction of what is actually happening inside them. There is a quiet but intense battle taking place, one that doesn't always translate into clear words or consistent behavior. On one side, there is the pull toward vulnerability, the genuine desire to reconnect, to feel that emotional closeness again. On the other side, there is an equally strong instinct to protect themselves, to avoid the very exposure that connection requires. These two forces don't take turns, they operate simultaneously, creating a kind of internal friction that shapes everything they say and do in that moment. This is why their presence can feel contradictory. They show up, which signals courage and intention, but they may not fully open up. They might express interest but hold back emotionally. They may linger in conversation yet avoid going too deep. It can feel confusing because their actions don't always align in a straightforward way. But that inconsistency is not manipulation, it's the visible effect of an internal system trying to balance opposing needs. Vulnerability for them is not a simple act of sharing feelings. It represents exposure, uncertainty, and the possibility of losing control. When they begin to open, even slightly, it activates a level of emotional intensity that can feel unfamiliar or even threatening. Their nervous system responds quickly, often pushing them to retreat just as they start to lean in. So you might notice moments where they seem engaged and present, followed by subtle shifts, changes in tone, deflection, or a sudden need to create space again. At the same time, the fact that they are there at all means something significant. It means that, despite their fear, they have chosen to face the situation rather than avoid it completely. That choice carries weight even if it's expressed imperfectly. Their willingness to be physically or emotionally present, even in a limited way, is often a sign that the connection still holds meaning for them. But meaning alone is not enough to override deeply ingrained patterns of self-protection. Their self-protection mechanisms are often automatic, shaped by past experiences where emotional exposure may have led to discomfort, rejection, or a loss of control. These patterns are not easily turned off. So even when they want to connect, those protective responses remain active in the background. They might filter what they say, avoid certain topics, or keep things light to prevent themselves from feeling too much too quickly. It's a way of managing the intensity, keeping it within a range that feels tolerable. This creates a delicate dynamic. If the interaction becomes too emotionally charged, their instinct may be to pull back again. But if it remains too distant or surface level, the deeper need for connection remains unfulfilled. They are, in a sense, trying to find a middle ground, engaging enough to maintain the connection, but guarded enough to feel safe. This balancing act is rarely smooth, which is why their behavior can shift within the same interaction. For the other person, this can feel like mixed signals. It might seem as though they are unsure, inconsistent, or even conflicted about their intentions. And in many ways they are. But the conflict is not about whether they feel something, it's about how to handle what they feel without becoming overwhelmed by it. Their hesitation is not the absence of emotion, it is the management of emotion. Understanding this internal struggle brings a different kind of clarity. It reveals that what you are witnessing is not a lack of care, but a difficulty in expressing and sustaining emotional openness. They are navigating unfamiliar territory, trying to engage with something meaningful while still holding on to their sense of safety. And until they learn how to integrate those two sides, vulnerability and self-protection, the tension between them will continue to shape how they show up. When they return after a period of silence, it can feel like the moment you've been waiting for. Emotions rise quickly: relief, curiosity, hope, maybe even unresolved frustration. And in that heightened state, it's easy to fall back into familiar patterns without even realizing it. But what most people don't recognize is that this exact moment is a turning point, not because of what they say or do, but because of how you choose to respond. Your response becomes the force that either reinforces the old cycle or interrupts it completely. If your reaction is driven by the past, by the confusion, the longing, the unanswered questions, then the dynamic tends to repeat itself. You might seek reassurance, ask for clarity too quickly, or try to secure the connection before it has naturally rebuilt. While these responses are human and understandable, they can unintentionally create pressure. And pressure is the very thing that often triggered their withdrawal in the first place. Without meaning to, you recreate the emotional environment that led to distance, and the cycle begins again. Closeness, overwhelm, withdrawal, silence. On the other hand, when your response is grounded in awareness rather than reaction, something fundamentally different begins to take shape. Instead of trying to immediately define the connection, you allow space for it to unfold. Instead of focusing on what was missing before, you pay attention to what is being shown now. This shift may seem subtle, but it changes the entire emotional tone of the interaction. You move from a place of seeking to a place of observing, from trying to control the outcome to allowing it to reveal itself over time. This doesn't mean becoming passive or indifferent. It means becoming intentional. It means recognizing that you have influence not over their behavior, but over the dynamic that forms between you. When you respond with calm, clarity, and self-respect, you set a different standard for how the connection operates. You show, through your behavior, that closeness does not have to come with urgency, pressure, or emotional instability, and that alone can begin to reshape how they experience the interaction. There is also a deeper layer to this. Your response reflects your relationship with yourself. If you respond from a place of need, needing answers, needing validation, needing certainty, then the interaction becomes centered around filling those gaps. But when you respond from a place of internal stability, where your sense of worth is not dependent on their presence or behavior, the dynamic shifts. You are no longer trying to extract something from the connection, you are evaluating whether the connection aligns with you. This shift is powerful because it changes the direction of energy. Instead of moving toward them in an attempt to close the gap, you remain centered and allow them to move toward you. This creates a different kind of space, one that invites engagement without demanding it. And for someone who is sensitive to pressure, this can feel significantly safer. It reduces the instinct to withdraw and increases the possibility of consistent interaction. At the same time, your response sets boundaries without needing to explicitly state them. The way you engage, the pace you maintain, the emotional tone you hold, all of these communicate what you are available for and what you are not. If you remain steady and self-assured, it becomes clear that inconsistency will not be met with overcompensation, and silence will not be met with pursuit. This doesn't push them away, it clarifies the terms of engagement in a way that is both grounded and respectful. Ultimately, this moment is not just about reconnection, it's about pattern recognition and choice. You are being presented with a familiar situation, but you are no longer required to play the same role in it. By choosing a different response, you introduce a new possibility. Whether the connection evolves or not, the cycle itself can change simply because you decided not to repeat it in the same way. There is a common misconception that power in emotional situations comes from controlling the conversation, controlling the outcome, or controlling how the other person feels about you. But in dynamics involving avoidance and distance, that approach often backfires. The more you try to chase, convince, or secure certainty from the outside, the more unstable the connection becomes. Real power operates differently. It doesn't come from reaction or pursuit, it comes from emotional certainty within yourself. Emotional certainty is not about knowing exactly what will happen or having all the answers. It's about knowing who you are, what you feel, and what you stand for, regardless of how someone else behaves. It's an internal anchor. When that anchor is strong, you don't get pulled into the highs and lows of someone else's inconsistency. You remain steady even when their behavior is unpredictable, and that steadiness is what shifts the entire dynamic. When someone returns after a long silence, the natural impulse is often to analyze every word, every action, every subtle signal. You might find yourself trying to interpret their intentions, wondering what they feel now, or whether things will be different this time. But this kind of focus places your emotional state in their hands. It creates a dependency on external validation, where your sense of stability rises and falls based on what they do next. That's not power, that's emotional vulnerability without protection. Emotional certainty redirects that focus inward. Instead of asking, what do they want? You begin to ask, what do I want? Instead of wondering, will they stay? You consider, does this align with the kind of connection I'm willing to be part of? These questions may seem simple, but they fundamentally change your position in the interaction. You move from being reactive to being intentional. You stop trying to secure the connection and start evaluating it. This doesn't mean you become closed off or indifferent. It means your openness is no longer driven by fear of loss. You can engage, listen, and even explore the possibility of reconnecting, but you do so from a place of choice, rather than need. That distinction is critical. When your actions come from choice, they carry a different energy, one that is grounded, calm, and self-assured. And that energy is felt immediately by the other person. For someone with avoidant tendencies, this kind of presence can be disarming. They are used to dynamics where distance creates pursuit, where their silence triggers emotional reactions. But when they encounter someone who remains steady, who does not chase or collapse into uncertainty, it disrupts their expectations. It introduces a new experience, one where connection is not tied to pressure or instability. And that can create a sense of safety that wasn't there before. At the same time, emotional certainty protects you from repeating patterns that no longer serve you. It allows you to recognize inconsistency without excusing it, to acknowledge effort without overvaluing it, and to set limits without feeling guilty. You don't have to withdraw or build walls to protect yourself. Your clarity does that for you. You know what you are available for, and you act in alignment with that knowledge. There is also a deeper level of freedom that comes with this. When you are emotionally certain, the outcome becomes less important than your alignment with yourself. Whether the connection grows, fades, or transforms into something else entirely, you remain grounded. You are not trying to control the ending, you are focused on how you show up within the process. And that focus gives you a sense of stability that external circumstances cannot take away. In the end, emotional certainty is what allows you to engage without losing yourself. It is what keeps you centered when things are unclear, and what guides your decisions when emotions are involved. It doesn't eliminate uncertainty in the situation, but it removes uncertainty within you. And once that internal clarity is established, everything else, every interaction, every response, every decision begins to reflect a level of strength that no external behavior can shake. Thank you for being here and investing your time in your own growth and understanding. Goodbye for now. Stay grounded, stay strong, and never lose yourself in the process.